It was a crisp spring afternoon in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. The sky stretched clear and blue over the countryside, and the scent of fresh grass mixed with the soft fragrance of roses and vanilla from the towering wedding cake set on an open field with rows of wooden chairs and hanging lights. The scene looked like something from a magazine. The bride, Lindsay Cooper, wore a lace gown with delicate beading and a long flowing train. Beside her stood her groom, Officer Matt Sullivan, in a sharp white tuxedo with black lapels, a mix of grace and the firmness of someone trained to face danger. Matt, a local police officer known for his discipline and dedication, looked proud and serious. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a union everyone had waited years to see. Among the guests, family, friends, and several off-duty officers, was one especially honored member, Axel, Matt's K-9 partner, a seasoned German shepherd with years of service in narcotics detection. Axel wore his black police vest, his eyes alert, ears perked. Though he wasn't on duty, everyone smiled at his presence. He had saved lives, uncovered danger stashes, and earned his place in that crowd. On that day, he was just expected to lie down and watch. The music quieted as a moment everyone was waiting for arrived. The cake cutting. Lindsay picked up the silver-handled knife, her hand trembling slightly from excitement. Matt placed his hand over hers, and the guests started counting down, their voices cheerful. 1, 2, and that's when Axel lunged forward. A deep, sharp bark cut through the air like a warning shot. Axel charged toward the three-tiered cake, nose down, teeth bared in a low growl. The crowd fell silent. Matt grabbed his leash, pulling back gently, but the dog was locked in, circling the cake, sniffing with trained intensity, his body stiff with tension. It wasn't playful. It wasn't random. It was a signal Matt had seen before during raids, during busts. Axel was alerting. The mood shifted instantly. A few officers stood up instinctively. Sergeant Thomas Riley, one of Matt's longtime colleagues, stepped forward, pulling on latex gloves with grim look. "Everyone, back away from the table," he said firmly. The photographer lowered his camera. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The celebration had turned into something else entirely. Lindsay's smile vanished. She looked at Matt with wide eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Matt, what is he doing?" He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Axel. But when he finally looked back at Lindsay, he noticed something he couldn't ignore. Fear and maybe something else. Matt's heart pounded as Sergeant Riley knelt beside the cake table, carefully lifting the bottom tier of the ornate structure. Axel stood firm beside him, tail stiff, eyes locked on the base like a soldier on command. The once cheerful murmurs of the crowd had turned to uneasy silence. The sound of the knife against the cardboard base echoed in the still air. Then came the moment no one expected. Riley's eyes widened. He stepped back slowly, his glove hand holding a small vacuum-sealed plastic pouch. It was stained, wrapped in wax paper, and clearly hidden deep inside the base of the cake. The air seemed to thicken. "It's fentanyl," Riley said, low but clear enough for those closest to hear. A collective gasp followed. A few guests immediately stepped back in horror, while others covered their mouths in disbelief. The mere presence of the substance was enough to trigger a serious investigation. Lindsay clutched Matt's arm, shaking her head. "What is this? Who would do something like this?" she asked, her voice rising, panic spreading across her face. Matt didn't answer. He was already thinking like a cop again, assessing the scene, thinking about who had access to the cake, where it was made, and who delivered it. The baker had been a local woman, Carolyn Weiss, known in the community for catering events for over 20 years. She had no record, no complaints. Matt had personally picked up the cake from her shop in Doylestown the day before. It had seemed perfect, nothing suspicious. But now the question was inescapable. Had someone tampered with it after the fact? Or had it always been there, waiting to be discovered? As Matt scanned the faces in the crowd, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about drugs hidden in a wedding cake. This was personal. His wedding had become a crime scene. The K-9 unit had just saved lives. Fentanyl exposure could have killed someone with just a trace. And now, amidst the chaos, something about Lindsay's expression nagged at him. She wasn't just scared. She looked cornered, defensive. She was watching the officers too closely. Matt filed it away, unsure what it meant, but unwilling to dismiss it. Meanwhile, Riley was on the radio, calling a full team. The wedding was officially suspended. Guests were escorted away from the food and asked to stay on the property until statements could be taken. The backyard celebration now looked like a restricted zone. Yellow tape was being pulled from pockets. Officers moved with mechanical precision. Axel sat beside the table, calm now, as if he knew his job was done. And yet, the unease in Matt's chest only grew. Lindsay tugged on Matt's arm, whispering, "Do you think someone's trying to hurt us?" Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't match the words. They weren't afraid. They were searching his face for understanding, for forgiveness. Matt didn't know, but something about that look made him wonder. What exactly did Lindsay know that she hadn't said yet? Matt stood a few feet away from a now-guarded cake table, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched. His wedding suit felt heavy on him now, like a costume worn by someone else. He wasn't a groom anymore. He was an officer back on duty. Across the lawn, Lindsay was speaking with one of the detectives, her voice low, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her veil. Matt watched her closely, trying to convince himself it was just stress. But deep down, something darker was growing inside him, suspicion. The investigation moved quickly. Officers began collecting fingerprints from the cake table, photographing every detail, interviewing guests one by one. Carolyn Weiss, the baker, was located at her bakery and brought in for questioning. Her initial reaction had been confusion, then horror. "I baked that cake myself," she insisted over the phone. "I decorated it yesterday morning and boxed it up. I don't understand how that could have been inside." Her voice shook, and Matt, listening to the recording of the call, could tell she wasn't lying, or at least she believed what she was saying. But then came the first real crack in the narrative. One of the catering staff, a young man named Eli Thompson, admitted under questioning that the cake had been briefly unattended for about 30 minutes after it arrived at the venue. The delivery was early, and while the staff set up the tables, the cake was left in the garage. Eli said he didn't think anything of it at the time, but that small window of time was enough. Anyone could have slipped something in if they knew what they were doing. That was when Matt remembered something. 2 days earlier, Lindsay had argued with him over logistics. She insisted the cake be picked up earlier than planned, even though refrigeration was concerned. At the time, Matt brushed it off as wedding stress, but now it felt deliberate. He hadn't said it out loud yet, but the thought wouldn't leave him. Was Lindsay involved in this, or was she protecting someone who was? As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn, Matt finally approached her. She looked pale, her makeup faded, her veil now resting in her lap. "We need to talk," he said quietly, and she nodded almost too quickly. They walked away from the main area toward the side of the barn. "Did you know?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, worn down by the weight of what this day had become. Lindsay didn't answer right away. Her eyes welled up with tears, but they didn't fall. Instead, she looked straight into Matt's eyes and whispered, "There's something I didn't tell you about my brother." Matt froze. The name alone, Jason Cooper, was enough to flood his mind with red flags. Lindsay's younger brother had always been a sore subject. Arrested twice for possession, once suspected to involve intent to distribute. Matt had been patient. But in recent months, Lindsay's responses had been curt, as if she were trying to avoid the topic. "He told me it was just a favor," Lindsay said, tears now sliding down her face. "He promised no one would get hurt. He needed to leave something at the wedding. I thought it was money, or maybe he was trying to pass a message to someone. I didn't ask too many questions, Matt. I didn't want to know. I just thought I was protecting him." Her voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of truth. She wasn't lying now, but she had been hiding something. "Do you realize what you're saying?" Matt asked, voice low, measured. "You let a fugitive, a known addict, use our wedding, our cake, as a drug drop." His words hit like punches. Lindsay flinched, but didn't back away. "He's my brother, Matt. I couldn't say no." Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. She wasn't defending what she did. She was owning it. Matt ran a hand through his hair. The weight of the badge he wasn't wearing pressed on him all the same. The fentanyl had been sealed, but it could have leaked. A single grain could kill. Children were at that wedding. His fellow officers, himself, his bride. "Do you know where he is now?" he asked finally. Lindsay shook her head. "He told me he'd be gone before the ceremony started. He wasn't even supposed to stay. I haven't seen him since yesterday morning." That made Matt's stomach twist. If Jason had been there, hiding nearby, or worse, if he was still around, then the danger hadn't passed. This wasn't just a case of smuggling drugs through a wedding cake. It was a live, ongoing threat. Matt stepped back and looked out toward the woods that bordered the property. A sudden chill moved through him. Something told him Jason wasn't gone. Not yet. And if he was desperate enough to use his sister's wedding for a drop, he might be desperate enough to come back for what he left behind. Matt couldn't shake the feeling crawling up his spine as he walked back toward the main area of the wedding. The music had long since stopped. The laughter was gone. Now the backyard looked like an active investigation scene. Yellow tape flapped in the breeze, and uniformed officers scanned the property like they were prepping for a raid. Sergeant Riley approached with a clipboard, his expression tense. "We're sweeping the grounds," he said quietly. "But if that kid is still here, he's not making much noise." Matt nodded, his mind already 10 steps ahead. He knew Jason knew how he operated. If he felt cornered, he'd hide. If he felt trapped, he'd run. But if he was desperate, and Matt believed he might do something reckless. Lindsay had said Jason would be gone before the ceremony, but her voice hadn't carried conviction. She didn't know where her brother was, and if Jason was in possession of more fentanyl, things could spiral quickly. Axel's behavior hadn't returned to normal either. The German shepherd remained on alert, ears up, pacing the perimeter of the barn as if still sensing something. Matt trusted that dog more than most people. He followed Axel around the property while officers questioned the catering crew again. One of the waitresses mentioned something odd. She had seen a man in a gray hoodie walking near the edge of the woods before the ceremony, but assumed he was part of the staff. No one had gotten a good look. Matt's pulse picked up. He turned toward the treeline, eyes narrowing. The woods surrounding the venue were dense, stretching nearly a mile in every direction. It would be the perfect place to hide if someone didn't want to be found. Matt grabbed a flashlight and called Axel to heel. He didn't ask permission. He didn't tell Lindsay. He just started walking toward the trees. A part of him was still a groom, but another part, the larger part, was a cop on the hunt. As they stepped into the shadows of the forest, the noise of the investigation faded behind them. Only the sound of Axel's paws in the leaves and Matt's steady breath remained. The deeper they moved, the colder the air became. Matt paused every few steps, scanning, listening. Then Axel stopped. His body went rigid. He let out a single sharp bark and turned sharply to the right. That's when Matt saw it. A torn piece of gray fabric caught on a branch, flapping gently. He crouched beside it, heart thudding. Jason had been here, and he might still be. Matt crouched low in the brush, his eyes scanning the undergrowth beyond the torn piece of fabric. Axel stood beside him, tail straight, nose twitching. The German shepherd let out another sharp bark and surged forward. Matt followed silently, flashlight off, heart hammering against his ribs. About 30 yards into the trees, behind a fallen log and half covered by loose branches, he saw movement. A figure hunched over, trembling. For a second, Matt didn't believe it. But then the face turned toward him. Jason Cooper. Jason looked thinner, paler than Matt remembered. His hoodie was soaked with sweat, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands trembled as he slowly raised them in the dim light. "Don't shoot," he muttered, voice hoarse. "I'm not armed." Matt didn't draw his weapon. Not yet. He didn't need to. The fear in Jason's eyes was real. But beneath it, there was something else. Shame and something darker, panic. Matt stepped closer, keeping Axel beside him. "What the hell did you do, Jason?" he asked. Jason sat back on the ground, exhaling shakily. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said. "I owed money to the wrong people. They gave me the package and told me to hide it. They said if I did it right, they'd leave me alone. I didn't know it was fentanyl until later." He shook his head violently. I swear, Matt, I don't want to hurt anyone. I just didn't know what else to do. Matt clenched his fists, the weight of the situation sinking in. You used your sister's wedding, he said, voice low with disbelief. You put everyone there in danger, including Lindsay. Jason looked down at his hands, his silence confirming everything. I thought it would be safe, that it would be over fast. I wasn't going to come back for it, but they changed the plan last minute. Told me someone was coming to retrieve it during the reception. That's why I stayed close. The implication chilled Matt to the core. Someone else was involved. Someone who hadn't shown up yet. Or worse, someone who was still among the guests. Jason wasn't the end of this. He was just the start. You're coming with me, Matt said, reaching for his radio. But before he could press the button, Axel growled and turned sharply toward the direction they had come. A rustling sound broke the silence. Footsteps. They weren't alone in the woods, and whoever was there wasn't trying to stay hidden anymore. Matt's instincts kicked in the moment he heard the footsteps. He rose slowly, placing himself between Axel and Jason, his hand moving toward the holster on his belt. But he wasn't wearing it. He was still in his wedding suit. No badge, no gun, just his training and a police dog with instincts sharper than most men. Axel let out a low, guttural growl, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the brush ahead. The footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming, deliberate, steady, not rushing. That told Matt one thing. They weren't afraid. From behind the trees, a tall man emerged mid-40s, dressed in black tactical clothing. No insignia, no ID. His posture was confident, but his eyes were dead cold. In his right hand, he held a small pistol, partially concealed under his jacket. In his left, a phone. He looked from Matt to Jason, then to Axel. You're early, the man said calmly. This wasn't part of the deal. His voice was quiet, steady, the kind of voice that came from someone who'd done this before. Jason stood up behind Matt, his voice cracking. I didn't call anyone. I swear. The man raised a hand to silence him. You broke protocol. You let the package get exposed, and now the cops are swarming the place. His eyes shifted to Matt. Let me guess. Groom and officer. That's inconvenient. He stepped forward. Axel growled louder, moving one paw ahead. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Matt's mind raced. He had no weapon, no backup, and a fugitive brother-in-law behind him. The odds were stacked, but he wasn't backing down. You're not leaving with anything, Matt said firmly. Whatever you were after, it's over. Walk away now, and you might live long enough to regret your choices. The man smirked. That's brave talk, officer, he said, stepping closer. But bravery without a weapon is just suicide. He raised the gun slightly. Jason stepped back, tripping over a root. Matt shifted his body forward, keeping Axel between them. He was preparing for the worst. But then, in a flash, Axel leapt. The dog moved like lightning, lunging at the man's arm before he could aim. The pistol fired once, the shot ringing through the woods, but went wide, hitting a tree. Axel's jaws clamped down on the man's forearm, dragging him sideways with brutal force. Matt surged forward, tackling the man to the ground. The phone flew from his hand. The gun skidded into the dirt, and for a moment, the forest exploded into chaos. Snarls, fists, yelling. But within seconds, it was over. The man was pinned, blood on his sleeve, Axel snarling at his throat. Matt looked down, breathing heavily, adrenaline surging. They had him. But as the man laughed softly through broken teeth, he muttered, You think I'm the only one? Matt knelt beside the subdued man, his breathing still ragged from the struggle. Axel remained locked in position, standing guard like a silent threat. The man's face was bloodied, but his smirk remained, unsettling and far too confident for someone who had just been taken down by a dog and an unarmed man in a tuxedo. You really don't get it, do you? He muttered, his voice raspy. This wasn't about your wedding. It never was. Matt's stomach tightened. What was it about then? He snapped. Talk. The man laughed quietly, spitting blood onto the ground. You think Jason's just a junkie who made a mistake? He's been working with us for months. You think that little package in the cake was the whole delivery? He coughed and added, It was a test, a diversion. You were supposed to focus on that while the rail shipment moved across state lines during your wedding. No one's watching the roads when half the precinct's at a party. Jason, standing a few feet away, paled. "That's not true," he said, voice cracking. "You never told me that." The man looked at him with cold amusement. "You were the perfect pawn. You wanted to save your sister. That's what made you useful. We didn't need you to know everything. Just enough to think you were doing something noble." Jason collapsed to his knees, the weight of the manipulation sinking in. His hands trembled as he looked at Matt, but Matt couldn't look back. Not yet. Matt grabbed the man's collar and pulled him close. "Who's in charge? Give me a name." But the man just smiled wider. "You won't stop it. By the time you get back to the house, it'll already be in motion. You're too late, Officer Sullivan. Way too late." Matt stood up, furious and shaken. He knew he couldn't waste another second. Whoever this man worked for, they were organized, strategic, and smart enough to use his wedding as cover. He looked down at Jason, who now sat in stunned silence. "You're coming with me," he said coldly. "No more secrets." Axel barked once, as if signaling the urgency. Matt grabbed the radio clipped to his belt, finally reattached by Riley before he'd gone into the woods, and called it in. "I need immediate lockdown at the reception site. Secure all guests. No one leaves. We have a second operation in play." The voice on the other end crackled. "Copy that. Lockdown initiated." And in that moment, Matt realized this wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was only the middle. By the time Matt and Axel returned to the wedding grounds, the entire atmosphere had transformed. Patrol cars blocked both exits to the property. Guests were being held in designated areas, and officers were sweeping vehicles, equipment, and even the catering van. Lindsay stood near the barn, arms crossed tightly, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as Matt approached, flanked by Jason in handcuffs and Axel by his side. Her lips parted to speak, but Matt simply raised a hand. "Not now." Sergeant Riley met them halfway. "We've got something," he said, voice clipped. Security footage from a neighboring property shows a second van pulling into the grounds around 10:15 a.m. wasn't listed in the rental or delivery schedules. No plates. We think it was a drop vehicle. Matt's mind was already racing. That was before most guests had even arrived. The cake had been delivered around 9:30. The timeline fit. The cake was the bait, but the real product likely moved in that van. What about the driver? Matt asked. Riley nodded toward a man seated in the back of a squad car. "We picked up a guy near the fence line. Said he was just looking for his wallet, but we found latex gloves in his coat pocket and traces of white powder under his nails. He's not talking yet." Matt clenched his jaw. It wasn't enough. Something was still missing. That's when Axel began barking again, sharp, urgent, and focused. His nose pointed toward the catering van parked near the far end of the property. Matt turned without hesitation, following the dog as he sprinted ahead. Riley shouted into his radio for backup. Within seconds, Matt and two officers had surrounded the van. Axel scratched at the side door. "Open it." Matt barked. Inside, beneath trays of leftover hors d'oeuvres, was a large cooler, sealed, heavy, and locked. The kind no one uses for food. Riley pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, layered under blocks of ice, were dozens of small vacuum-sealed packages, identical to the one found in the cake. Fentanyl. Enough to supply several cities. Enough to kill thousands. Matt's breath caught in his throat. They'd almost missed it. Lindsay stepped closer now, her voice quiet, shaking. "I didn't know about any of this, Matt. I swear." He looked at her for a long moment. This time, not as a groom, not even as a cop, but as a man standing between two worlds, love and duty. "We'll talk later," he said. "Right now we finish this." And deep down, Matt knew there was one last truth left to uncover. The sun had long since dipped below the trees when Matt stood at the edge of the property, watching the last of the evidence be loaded into unmarked vans. The cooler, the van, the weapons, all cataloged and secured. Jason sat silently in the back of a cruiser, cuffed and hollow-eyed. Officers came and went, nodding at Matt with quiet respect, but giving him space. The chaos had subsided. The adrenaline was gone. Now only the weight of everything remained. Lindsay approached slowly, the train of her wedding dress dirty and torn at the hem, her bouquet long discarded. Her eyes were red, not from makeup or emotion, but from exhaustion. They hadn't spoken since Matt gave his final report. Now they stood just feet apart, but it felt like a canyon between them. "I didn't know how deep it went," she said quietly. "I thought I was helping him. I thought I could protect both of you." Matt didn't speak right away. Part of him still didn't know what to say. "You should have told me," he finally said. "I could have helped. I would have helped. But instead you let our wedding become a cover for a drug trafficking operation. People could have died. Lindsay. Kids were here." His voice broke slightly at the end, more from heartbreak than anger. Lindsay nodded, tears running down her cheeks now, silently. "I didn't just lose Jason today," she whispered. "I think I lost you too." Matt looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw the full weight of her regret. Not guilt to escape punishment, but the kind that lingers long after the punishment ends. "I don't know what happens next," he said honestly, "but I can't pretend this didn't happen. Trust doesn't just come back. It has to be rebuilt, if that's even possible." She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't beg. She just nodded and stepped back, and that somehow hurt more than anything else. Matt turned toward Axel, who had laid quietly beside them the whole time, eyes watching everything. "Good job, partner," he murmured. As the last police car pulled away, Matt stood alone in the silence of what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. The wedding had ended, the guests were gone, and the truth had shattered the fairy tale. But somewhere in that brokenness, there was still something left. A man who chose justice, a woman facing her mistakes, and a dog who had never once failed him. And as Matt walked down the gravel path, one thought echoed in his mind. Not all endings are happy, but some are necessary.